While leading a singular emergency services organization is a challenge, having responsibility for multiple emergency services can definitely create a significant amount of stress. We'll talk with the leader of a complex emergency services organization about what it takes to care for these public servants involved in the wide spectrum of emergency services. Up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety.
Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So in this episode, we're going to wrap up a series that we've been doing. It's been during the month of October, which is National Fire Prevention Month. The focus has not just been on individuals in organizations with multiple experiences in emergencies, but this time we're going to talk to the leader of an organization who has multiple experiences across multiple emergency agencies, all under the same umbrella. So some local governments in the United States have seen fit to place, again, multiple emergency service organizations in a single agency with a single leader. The strategy certainly presents some overall efficiency. It also it actually creates a potential for a more intense experience to those who are involved in these emergencies, incidents, and disasters. So the source of emergency responders' stress can include witnessing human suffering, the risk of personal harm, intense workloads, life and death decisions, and separation from family. Stress prevention and management is critical for responders to stay well and to continue to help in the situation when they're called. Responders must feel well and be thinking clearly to take care of others. And there are some important steps that responders can and should take both during, after, and even before an event to make sure that they are prepared to serve the general public. It's great to catch up with an old friend from back in the day who's doing some great work in the great state of Texas. And let's get started. As I so often do, let's start with an introduction from our guest, by our guest, with this question: who is Chris Connealy?
Well, Chief Daniels, I always call you Chief, brother, because that's how our paths crossed way back in the day. But yeah, I'm Chris Connealy, and I've been in emergency services for 45 years. And I started with the Houston Fire Department and spent 26 years there and promoted through the ranks up to fire chief. And as I always say in Houston, when you become fire chief, you're getting ready to be the ex-fire chief, because every time we have a strong mayor form of government, and every time the mayor changed, so has the fire chief since 1895 when the department went paid. So they're consistent. And sometimes even the mayor appointed you don't last there. But fortunately, I did okay in that area. But that said, then when I retired, I always, Houston's home and still is. I don't live there presently, but family's still there. But I always wanted to live in Central Texas. And so I'm in the Austin area in Williamson County, where it's Georgetown, Round Rock, some of the bigger cities, Cedar Park, where I took a fire chief's job there in Cedar Park Fire Department in 2004, and was there through 2012, and really enjoyed my time there. But, Chief, I've never been in the fire marshal division, whether it be fire prevention or fire investigation, but that didn't stop me from applying to be state fire marshal. And so go figure, I became state fire marshal here in Texas. And really, I was intrigued by the challenges of some of the fire investigations that were being called into question. And there was a particular case that was ongoing, a gentleman that got, he was actually executed and for this crime, but nevertheless, the fire investigation, based on all this feedback from experts, was challenged. So that intrigued me. I like trying to go into organizations and make them better. And so, despite not having that background, I'm a fire investigator, but you don't want me investigating your fire. I took the test, passed, but never been a fire inspector. But nevertheless, I like challenges, and so did that for 6 years and really enjoyed it. And then ultimately, bosses changed. I had my fourth boss in 6 years, and anyway, I decided that I wanted to go back into more fire services, oriented on the other side. And so I've been here with Williamson County Emergency Services. My official title is Senior Director. And so the biggest department is EMS. And then the next biggest department is Emergency Communications. And then we have a Fire Marshal, Special Operations. We help coordinate as far as hazmat, technical rescue, swift water, that sort of things. But the fire departments here in Williamson County, they're the firefighters. So it's a good model. We provide coordination equipment, and they provide the bodies. And I discovered that model when I was in Cedar Park. And so anyway, so I came back to Williamson County, and so I've been here for 5 years. And my goal is, this is the final chapter in my career. And so I'll be retired in another 7 or 8 years. I'm still having fun, so right. I'm not ready to retire yet.
Right.
That's my short story, or not so short.
I feel you on that one. It's just it's interesting when people talk about the concept of retirement. I've tried it a couple of times; it hasn't worked out very well because I find myself still interested in making a contribution and doing things I enjoy doing. And it looks like you're doing the same. Just doing something.
Sure, give it a heck of a try. But yeah, it's been a good career. But I'm sure we'll probably touch on some topics today that some of them back in my Houston days where we lost a firefighter. And
right.
So yeah, I'm wide open book. So
yeah, right now. Well, so before we get into both a little bit of reminiscing, a little bit of what's going on with you now. When you hear the term psychological health and safety, what does that mean to you? When you hear that, what does that mean?
Well, through your work and many others, it wasn't a topic that was discussed in a good part of my career, and I'm sure yours too, Chief. But what I consider is we always look at the physical aspects, but not the mental aspects in the fire service. And so there's been a big push through a lot of people's collective efforts that we need to focus on why it's always been there. I know myself, and just, and when I was chief in Houston, the biggest issue was DWIs and also spousal issues hitting your wife, if you will, what have you. And I never put together at the time that may have been stresses from a very, busy and, complex fire department, that we put them in a lot of different situations, not to make that the totality of where that behavior was coming from. But no doubt there was aspects of that coming through, and they would get in these criminal investigations that was, not typical for most firefighters with having issues with discipline. It's not criminal, it's other matters. But that was my first, I started thinking about that more and more as that was evolving, because I wasn't very familiar with it. Right. And maybe the previous fire chiefs in Houston had those experiences, but certainly it was a fairly common criminal charge on firefighters that we had to deal with on discipline.
Right. Well, honestly, as I think back to when I first joined the fire service in the 80s, they told us a lot about, hose and ladders and fans and, and stuff like that to move smoke around. The thing that they didn't talk a lot about, though, were the mental and emotional aspects of the industry. I tell people often that I went to my first fire. I think I'd been on a job for a few weeks. I went to my first dead person within 3 days. I was 21 years old, a few years out of high school, and I'd never seen a person die before. Never had. I certainly hadn't seen a colleague die, and that happened a year later. And those things kind of kept happening year after year after year. And I honestly do believe that, and it's not just fire rescue service, it's all jobs. There's a stress associated with doing the work that an employer asks you to do, but sometimes they don't realize it. I'm not saying they do it intentionally, but folks tend to be so focused on the work. And so when you went out and hired that firefighter, police officer, dispatcher, whoever it is, there's a big long test and we look for the best people and get them a lot of training and all that. So why is it that, a year or two into it, they're having domestic issues at home and they're drinking? Some of it is the work, really. Some of it is the work. And we're just finally starting to recognize that exposure to the hazards of seeing all the things that we've seen and the things that, we experience as human beings, they do have an impact on how people do their job. So I guess it's, better late than never. And it's good to, to be able to have the conversation. So talk a little bit about what the emergency services organization usually, what does it do? What makes it different? People know about fire departments and police departments, and some people know about 911 dispatchers. But so talk a little bit about how your organization is set up and how it might be a little different and similar to some of what people might already know.
Well, Williamson County, the Commissioner's Court, I'm the second senior director, and they created these senior directors within the county because the elected officials, report to the county judge and then the other commissioners as well. So you have 5 bosses, if you will, in my role. And so they had too many people reporting to them, because also department directors as well. So they grouped various departments under senior directors. And so instead of EMS reporting directly to the court, as well as communications, I am that point of contact between the court and the respective departments. So span of control is much better for the court. So that's how we've evolved. And there's a few other departments structured like similar to us around the country. But, we don't, other than a fire marshal's office, I don't have any fire apparatus, or it's not a fire department per se, but that's our primary governmental entities that we work with is certainly the fire departments. Like tonight, we have our Williamson County Fire Chiefs Association meeting, so we're very much involved with the fire chiefs and certainly law enforcement, but mostly the fire service.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if this occurred to me again back in the day that the things that actually keep the fire rescue service afloat rarely have anything to do with things on fire. I mean, fires are only, last I checked, less than 4% of what firefighters do. And so you find that people get into it for that reason and almost get distracted by some of these other things that they're, sometimes not all that good at, sometimes don't really have expertise in. So when a community decides to set that over here and let these folks focus on, a couple of things. I know back in the day, sometimes I think folks try to take on too many things and try to be too good at all of them. And again, that's just more stress. That's just a lot more stress. So again, and that's something that's also unique to Texas is the referring to systems that aren't, having a county judge that isn't necessarily in a courtroom, that whole type of thing. I know a little bit about it from watching TV. I can't say I've actually been in it, but that's a different kind of setup. But I think it requires some different arrangements of services as well. So can you chat a little bit about, you talked earlier about being in the fire rescue service and all of that. What's your assessment of some of the emotional challenges that the folks in your agency face?
Well, again, while I don't have firefighters within Williamson County Emergency Services, other than interacting with them, as I mentioned previously, but certainly, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times with the pandemic, certainly our paramedics, we're a pretty busy system. We're about 700,000 people in Williamson County, and part of the city of Austin's in Williamson County, but Travis County next door has most of the city of Austin. But anyway, with all of a metro area, that we have those challenges that you'd find in most metro areas. We're certainly not familiar with in Houston and certainly here in Williamson County, that we have a lot of folks. And with all the challenges of having, or the blessings of having a big population, and some of the challenges that come with it. And certainly what I've found that Williamson County does very well, and this helps with stress. And in Houston, we didn't do a good job of continuing adding enough EMS resources. Certainly in a fire department, you can concentrate on the fire part, and we can all tell stories of if you go on the ambulance within a fire department, well, you're not a real firefighter no more, and all those type of issues. And, but hopefully it's getting better. But certainly here within Williamson County, they're not getting on a fire truck. They're a paramedic for their whole career. And there's a few spots in administration, but you're going to be on the streets. But the county's done a very good job of adding additional units so that we keep the call volume relatively low. And quite frankly, once we start having our EMS units averaging just over 6 calls in a 24-hour shift, it's time to add another ambulance in that response area. And we have metrics that Mike Knipstein, my EMS director, has done an awesome job, and his predecessors, of educating the court and the budget office of how we need to maintain a workload that's reasonable, that doesn't burn out our people where we're cycling through them and they quitting, and large numbers that you find in large systems. That's not fire-based EMS. And that's one of the beautiful things about fire-based EMS is you can eventually get on a fire truck where, not to minimize the workload there, but I know my experience of being on the ambulance was much more being busy than being on the fire apparatus. And so with that, we keep on adding units, but even through all what I call a very proactive approach, certainly the pandemic call volume increased significantly, as it did all over the country. And we had a number of staff leaving during that period. They were just burned out. They were done. And they didn't feel like we were getting them the help and the resources that they needed. And while we obviously during that compressed time of the pandemic, that most of us, none of us were alive when the previous pandemic in the country in 1918 and what have you, that this was uncharted territory for us. While we know what a pandemic is, but until you lived it, you don't know what it's like. And certainly our paramedics were on the tip of the spear of dealing with all that. And so with being fearful of bringing, the disease home to their family, and certainly their constant exposures, and just constantly running, that we were really struggling. And quite frankly, even since the pandemic, while we're getting more paramedics graduate out of various paramedic schools, whether it be at universities or wherever they're coming from, we had to change our model because we were all paramedics. We had no EMTs. So dual paramedics on the units. We just introduced EMTs about 6 months ago. And that's helped us while, and I can get into a long discussion of the other things we had to do to mitigate the stresses within the EMS. But certainly we weren't getting them, they weren't available. A lot of colleges had to shut down during the pandemic. But even then, we're not finding as many people wanting to become a paramedic, but there's quite a few still emergency medical technicians out there in the marketplace. And so, and there's no reason not to have EMT and a paramedic together. It's just different for Williamson County. It's not uncommon, certainly throughout the nation. And so we moved to that model. We were late to that approach, but it was a godsend for us. Fortunately, we had that safety valve, so we filled our vacancies and what have you. But and then some just better, morale got challenged because they're stressed and bad. We had a suicide, and that really left a mark, as you would expect and should, on the organization. Very popular paramedic, and no one really saw that coming, and very unfortunate. And so with that and just the frustrations and what have you, we had some, it was a challenging time. I always say my EMS director, he didn't have much gray hair back then. He's got a lot now. And but we've collectively worked through that process, and the county's been very supportful. So with bringing in EMTs, continuing adding units, and quite frankly, we had to change our model. Chief, trying to go to the fire station and meet with the crew and talk, and so they can share their concerns and issues and have those conversations. It's always better to be person to person. But they're running, and you try to find them, and you go to the hospital, maybe the emergency room, or what. But it's a difficult time to have good conversations. And so now we pay overtime to be on these monthly question and answer sessions. So myself and the EMS director, and again, we pay you overtime to be on the call. We really want you there to get all your questions answered and share concerns or issues. And that has been a godsend for us with morale, because people are getting their questions answered. And quite frankly, not as many people are attending, but we still have the monthly meetings because we want to have that available, because that's all part of the stresses that builds on our first responders. And they want to speak with leadership, and not that leadership don't want to speak, because you've been a fire chief, and me too. You've got 4,000 people, like you said. It's a struggle, and we did a lot of station visits, but it's never enough. And I don't know why we didn't, especially with technology. It's a godsend. And our emergency communications department has started that process as well. So they have monthly meetings. As we have 78 people in emergency communications and about 150 in EMS, that approach with shift work and what have you, we talk to everyone that wants to be talked to and answer the questions and make changes where we need to make. And so all that helps to improve morale. And it's been a great approach for us here in Williamson County.
Wow. I hope folks who are listening are taking notes, because what you all are doing is responding to the current environment. I hear a lot of people talk about, we've done it this way for X number of years, and we got our traditions we got to uphold, but some of those traditions don't seem to be working because people are leaving. Even some of the people, and a lot of the people who leave, to be quite honest, at least in my experience, the ones who tend to leave first are the ones that you probably want the most, because they're the ones who have the highest level of skill. They have other options. They could go places. It's like having a sports team, and your top athletes, you sometimes have to pay them a little bit more, have to do something special to keep them, because they could go play anywhere. And I think the same applies to folks in the emergency services business. There's some good people out there, and they've got a lot of training, a lot of skills, and they do have other options, to include doing other things altogether. So let me ask you a question. Excuse me, a question about, so a lot of the efforts, it sounds like, have gone into ensuring that the worker bees, the folks who are, up close and personal with, seeing the 700,000 people in your community, ensuring that they have a safe environment. So what are your thoughts about the stress associated with leadership? You mentioned a little bit with your director. And it's an observation over the course of my career. I found that sometimes the leaders kind of get forgotten about or left out. And then you wonder why it's difficult to find good leaders, why people don't necessarily want to do it. So talk a little bit about some of the impact on leaders and some thoughts you have about how to help them be in a safe environment as well.
Well, as I mentioned, with an EMS director, and he's an outstanding leader, and but I could see the stresses. I mean, as I say, Stevie Wonder could see the stresses on him because it was, and he's a good man, but you can only take so much. And same thing with my. In fact, I had a previous emergency communications director, and he was doing an excellent job. And I've known, and I'm not proud of this, but if you're not doing a good job, after some coaching and mentoring, we're going to go different ways. And because, it's the organization's priority. Not discounting the coaching and mentoring. I spend too much time on that times, but I will eventually make a decision. So anyway, after some previous leadership when I first got here and some changes that came about, but the EMS director has been here for 27 years, outstanding leader, as I said, but visiting with him. But going to emergency communications, we had some changes that needed to take place because it was a toxic environment for various reasons. And changes weren't manifesting where they needed. And so work with them, but we had to make some changes and made some what I feel was good choices. And I'm biased, so I made it. So there you go. But we had started much better outcomes. But even this is 2 directors ago in communications, because communications, as you mentioned earlier, it is a tough environment that I don't know if law enforcement and fire and EMS really appreciate the challenges within communications because they're not out on the street. Well, they're first responders every bit as much as what those on a fire truck or on a police vehicle or ambulance. But we had to fix those issues. So got another director, and she was doing a great job. But the stress that was coming on her trying to make the fixes to the organization, because she's always been successful, and filling vacancies is the number one issue in every communication center throughout the country and probably the world, and constantly trying to adapt to be attractive in a tough marketplace post-pandemic, as we're all very much aware of. And it was challenging before the pandemic, even more so now. And she was having some real difficulties, and she left the organization on her own choice, and it was a great loss. And we had another person that I appointed, and he's a Marine, fought in Afghanistan, and highly decorated, and he knows radios backwards and forwards. Good man, but the 24/7, 365 aspects of emergency communications, you never get a break. And there's always issues to address and what have you. And he had a grandchild.
Oh.
Big life change. He wanted to, spend more time, and he took an assessment of his life. And as so as your point, Chief, that we needed, you got to be cognizant of the leadership too and meet their needs. And I hated losing him. He was doing a phenomenal job, but you know what? You need to go hang out with grandbabies. And we had a position open in our wireless communications department. So he took that, and it's less stress than being in emergency communications, quite frankly. And so his skill sets fit very well there. And so the present emergency communications director, she's phenomenal. And I've been blessed. And fortunately, she's sticking with us. But I can see it on her. Even today in our leadership meeting with all the directors, I can just see it on her. And it's just, and I've got, and I am very cognizant of, and sit down and visit with her and mandate, you got to be off. You need to take some time off and be with your family, and you can't focus on work all the time. And we're working through that. And as and she certainly is, but your earlier reference, it's a meat grinder. And so with leadership, as well as our dispatchers and the supervisors in between, that whole chain of command, it's a very difficult assignment that I don't know the rest of the first responder family really appreciates what emergency communications goes through. And certainly I've had dispatch offices in Houston and what have you, and led those, but this is even more so than at this stage of my career, and with all the changes that we discussed with the pandemic and just the marketplace and the challenges, it's getting harder and harder.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
It is. Yeah, I again, Chief, it just sounds so familiar on the one hand, and familiar for a bunch of reasons. It's not only the first responder community that doesn't necessarily understand and appreciate it, the community doesn't either. Because, I mean, since the 70s, folks have been able to pick up their phone, push 911, and people just show up, and help. But things are not what they once were, a lot of, and I see a lot of what you do similar to other organizations around the country. In many ways, you're the front edge of the healthcare system. You're the front edge of the mental health system. You're the front edge of the legal system in many ways. And the first on the scene, first to get the call, first to know that there's an issue. And all of those challenges, they do affect people. And again, to your point, it is a bit of a meat grinder that the system has to understand that if you want to get a good product on the one end, you got to put the investment on the other end, it's going to take money. You can't demand people show up for conversations, they have to be compensated for it, but you also have to have people on the street. So again, it's really interesting to hear, the steps that you all are taking to try to address this. And it's not the traditional stuff. Yeah, of course, you got to buy a CAD system, you got to have radios and all of that. But if you don't have the human beings, so you've always impressed me as the type of guy, because even your demeanor now, it seems to be the same as it was years ago. It's kind of a even-keeled type of guy and all that type of thing. But is there or was there something that got you more interested in kind of, the mental health and caring for other people, or is this just kind of how you're wired?
Well, Chief Daniels, and I'm not just going to trade compliments with you, but I've known you in that way. You care for your people, and while I expressed earlier that we weren't as focused on mental health in the early days, and really wasn't much discussed about it. You just sucked it up and dealt with it, but. We can take care of the physical aspects, and that's easier, quite frankly, but the mental aspects, more challenging to recognize, but certainly I think we're a good place in society now that we're really taking a lot more focus, looking at the mental health of everyone, whether you're in emergency services and other workplaces and the home, and there's a lot going on there. In fact, to the point, we've incorporated our emergency communication. We have our local mental health authority, Blue Bonnet Trails Community Foundation. They do a great job. That they're embedded in our dispatch center because Mrs. Smith's calling, and our dispatcher, quite frankly, those calls take a lot of time to process and untangle what's really going on. Why are you calling 911? And it may not really be an emergency, but they're in crisis. So that's an emergency. But but our dispatchers aren't trained in that area. And while we give them a little class while they're getting certified, they're not ready to really do that. And so we've embedded, licensed mental health counselors in our dispatch center 24/7, where they take those calls. And additionally, they're there for our staff because they're in the next pod right over in our communications floor that they can recognize as one of our dispatchers needs a little brief conversation or what have you. So there's a lot of win-win there. And of course, we have all the subsequent programs that we started the podcast with the various services we provide. Well, you and I were talking, we have this Dr. Tanya Glenn and what have you, we have a contract with, and anyone can go and, no questions answered. But we need to deal with mental health with our customers being Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but we also need to take care of our staff. And so we're getting some synergy there with having this local mental health authority, these mental health experts on our comms floor. So there's, some win-win aspects there. But even with all that, they still reach out, and I'm glad they are, with contracted services that we provide the employees. And, I will tell you, we had to add money to that budget. We don't know names, and, those protocols, don't want to know. But just, hey, we're running out of money in this account, and we need to, and the court been wonderful. They replenish it, no questions asked, and just, because they value the importance of what we need to be taking care of our first responders. And
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're ultimately, and it appears that they get it. You either invest on that side to try to minimize the impact of some of these things that folks experience, or you end up spending twice or three or five times as much replacing the person because they decided to go do something else because they just simply can't take it. This is, to be quite honest, I had no idea you all were this deep into this. I wanted to catch up with you and just talk about, some of the general thoughts, but wow, it seems like there's a lot of focus and investment. And again, we're having this conversation amongst, guys who spent time in the fire rescue service or in the emergency services public sector. But these same kinds of approaches would work, I believe, in any organization because they're all made up of people. They're all people. They're all people. They're,
Common denominator. They're all human beings. And it doesn't matter whether it's dispatching or manufacturing or, or at a hospital. It doesn't matter. They're still human beings that are exposed to lots and lots of things. So the definition of a psychosocial hazard that I discovered in my research is that it's a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person exposed as a threat to them that affects their behavior. And it's very different. You and I could be in the very same room, hearing the very same things, and it triggers something for me that it doesn't for you, or something for you that it doesn't for me, based on all kinds of things. And, the same way, as we were discussing earlier, that we've paid attention to ergonomics and making sure people have stand-up desks and, get to, have the right shoes, we ought to be concerned about people's emotions, because the foot injury that the foot injury you avoid, or even if you get injured, you can recover from that a lot quicker than you can some of the emotional trauma, that folks are exposed to. And they're going to carry that in many cases for the rest of their lives. And the time that, again, it's just wonderful to hear the time that you all are taking to be concerned about these human beings, not only the job that they're doing, but about these folks as human beings, because they're going to take that stress home. Back to your point about, having domestic issues, it's because sometimes they took the stress home because it wasn't addressed at work. Just a wonderful, wonderful recognition. And having these mental health folks embedded, I think that's also just that's it. Sounds like a winner. Yeah, and we was organized a mobile outreach team when I first started here. It's transitioned to our local mental health authority, but they responded to crises, mental health crises in the community as well. So Williamson County, and they fund additional mental health beds for the community as part of living in Williamson County, because a lot of people can't afford mental health care.
Right.
Right. And so they fund a large number of beds, and then and this same mental health authority is very much vested into our law enforcement side of the house, both with the impacts with the community's having and the police officers and sheriff deputies interacting with these folks. And we get these mental health professionals that are mobile. They'll go and deal with that crisis because, one, they got other calls to answer, but they don't want to leave these people in crisis. And so we get these mental health professionals come in, whether it be on the street, on a comm floor, wherever, dealing with the issues that Mrs. Smith, our taxpayers, are having. So it's trying to touch on all the different fronts, both for the citizens that pay our salaries and certainly our workforce, that we got to take care of both, because it's throughout the community and no one's exempt from these challenges. And certainly Williamson County is I would call it a pretty prosperous county as a whole. But nevertheless, we still have our share of lower income and those having other challenges in their lives. And of course, addictions are everywhere and what have you. And so, I call a suburban urban environment where Williamson County is these days versus it used to be primarily rural. Those days are long gone. Williamson County had to adapt, and the Commissioner's Court really had a forward-leaning approach to that over the years. And so, I can't take credit for this. A lot of this was already in place, and we're just continually fine-tuning it as we go on.
Right. Yeah. My assessment of the pandemic in general, and this is just personal, that I don't really think the pandemic changed a lot, but it exposed a lot of things that were already going on. Folks were already stressed. Systems were already, in some cases pulled to their, to their capacity. It was already going on. There are a lot of people who had illnesses and whatnot before the pandemic. And what the pandemic did is speed everything up. Most of the folks who unfortunately lost their lives were already sick. Most of the businesses that failed were already struggling. And it doesn't take away the horror of the entire experience for us as a species. But it does say that, the extent to which we can invest on the front end and be more resilient and have systems in place and give ourselves a little bit of grace, a few extras, rather than, I know a lot of folks went to business school and learned the, Lean Six Sigma and, do as much as, do a lot with a little. But that doesn't, when you're dealing with human beings, it doesn't really work all that well. And humans end up having to pick up the leftovers when the system is too stressed and isn't funded properly and isn't resourced properly. So it's encouraging, really, to hear, that it's actually being done.
Well, I agree with your assessment. That's not to agree with you, but I think you're dead on with it. Wasn't just the pandemic. It just exacerbated and exposed all these other underlying issues that were at full boil already, quite frankly. And this was the tipping point of the pandemic. And but we have a duty, and certainly in public safety, that we need to take care of Mrs. Smith, as Chief Brendan Sinney always said, that we're both disciples of in his tribe, that it's all about Mrs. Smith, but we also have to take care of firefighter Smith and paramedic Smith, dispatcher Smith, that whole group that comes together to bring good things to the community. And but those underlying issues have been there throughout society. I'll make the comment, I wasn't aware about as much mental health challenges growing up. And I'm 64, so I graduated high school in 1977. You didn't hear about these things. They kept it behind closed doors, and but I think it's healthy for society to have this. This is out loud and proud now. The concerns of mental health and knowing that workplaces of all types have to deal with the stresses that's in our society. And then certainly those of us that are public servants, not only taking care of our people that serve the community, but the community as a whole. And we need to look for opportunities to fill in the gap where there's holes. And we're not there completely in Williamson County, and we're never going to arrive. But just in the 5 years that I've been here, it's been even more aggressive pace that Williamson County is really working hard to try to stay on top of the situation as best we can. And again, there's always room for improvement, and they're committed to that improvement. And that's what I really enjoy working here, because it's probably, and I've been blessed working very good in different public safety organizations over my career, but I would say Williamson County is probably the best well-run governmental entity that I've ever been a part of in my 45 years. That they're very much lean forward, and certainly I was talking about emergency management briefly. There's a disaster. I've never seen so many disasters one after another in my career, and so our county judge has very high expectations and we are not going to fall short of them. We lean forward very aggressively. We got storms coming in, and it takes a toll on my emergency management department. But we spent probably about 60 nights in the 5 years I've been here, and 30 days during the pandemic. We never went home at all. But we had RVs in the backyard here at our Emergency Service Operations Center. But to the point that we're going to activate and be ready for disasters. But with disasters, you've got these mental health issues that are out there, but we have some infrastructure throughout the system. And we've partnered with, I don't want to not mention this. We have a number of church partners, the religious community, that help during disasters, and also other aspects that helps the community as a whole, not just fulfilling physical needs, but mental health needs as well.
Right. It's what you're sharing are just gems, because when we think about this from a emergency management perspective, you can't. The two systems don't work. If you have this emergency system you only use in the disaster and you don't use it every day, it's not going to work in the disaster either. A lot of it starts with basic infrastructure that's in place. I heard once that good teams don't meet in the huddle. They don't. So it's having the emergency medical service delivery system that works when there isn't a disaster. Having mental health care providing systems when there's not a disaster. It's caring about people when there isn't a disaster. If it's just a routine, you just scale it up. You don't have to start from, you just scale it up. And but it just really emphasizes the importance of doing these things. It's got to be a part of your everyday life, not something special, it's got to be every day, because that's when you get really, really, really good at it. So as we bring our conversation to a close, what are some, what are some thoughts you could leave with folks that, let's say they're in a local government someplace that are really, kind of encouraged by what you're doing and what Williamson County is doing. Are you all open to folks, reaching out to you and, using you as a model, or, so share a little bit about how folks might find out more about what you all are doing.
Okay. Well, you can, is it appropriate to give my email address?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's Chris.Connealy, CONN as in Nancy, EALY at Wilco, WILCO.org. Chris.Connealy at Wilco.org. And you want to put that in the notes of the podcast, Chief, and feel free. And but certainly you can go to our website, just go, Wilco.org here, www.wilco.org, and you will find us, and you can go to Mercy Services and what have you. But certainly we're pretty easy to find with the technology these days, and we're Williamson County Emergency Services, and so just go to our website and look us up, and return emails, and we return phone calls.
Oh, and, right on.
Within a day,
right,
or listen to the weekend, and so that's a pet peeve of mine. And so we'll be responsive, and certainly we appreciate the opportunity. And we want to learn what other good things are going out there, and certainly through your podcast, you're exposing these good things that are going on throughout in public safety, certainly in this sphere, that I would love to hear what others are doing and what we could do in Williamson County that we haven't thought of yet. And we haven't thought of everything by no means. But this is a I don't know if you call it a war, but I think it's a full war, that this is not going away, that this is a continuous war. Now, we've always had it with the physical ailments, but now the mental health, and I'm glad it's more in the forefront. And certainly you and others in this space are bringing attention to these issues. And I've been one of them not paying much attention to it years ago, and I've had to modify that, and seeing these behaviors, like we started the conversation earlier, what I was seeing in Houston with these DWIs and battery things that were going on with marital disputes, that I wouldn't tying that together with the stresses that we were putting those firefighters through and our paramedics within the Houston Fire Department. And we got a department psychologist, Dr. Perel, and God rest his soul, he's no longer with us, but he was very hopeful. We had line of duty deaths that you're familiar with, and certainly the 40 Tower fire, Captain Yankee was killed October 13, 2001. I remember it like yesterday. I wake up and go to bed with Captain Yankee every day to this day. And that, we had at that time a department of psychology. He was very helpful to us, but boy, I look back on those days and it was good, but we're so much better now because so much attention's been paid to this issue that we have to, because we're not going to keep our workforce healthy if we don't pay attention beyond just the physical aspects, but the mental health. We are destined for failure if we don't focus a lot of resources on that, because our folks, when they're not healthy mentally, they're not healthy physically either, and bad things are happening in their life. And we introduce a lot of those bad things to the job that we make them do. And I think we have a responsibility, and I know we have a responsibility to take that very seriously and do more and be open to new ideas to make improvements, and more importantly, listen to your workforce. Because they're going to tell you, whether through resignations or discipline issues, you're going to see all kinds of manifestations of what largely is mental health challenges on wherever they're causing those particular issues, and it's usually multifaceted, home life as well as the work life. But they are a part of our family, and we need to take care of our family when they're on duty and when they're off.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, again, thanks very much, Senior Director Chris Connealy of the Williamson County, Texas Department of Emergency Services. We've certainly appreciated the conversation today, and appreciated the gems that you've dropped. And if you're watching this episode on the Flourish DX YouTube page, please do like, subscribe, and share. Pass it on to a friend. If you're watching or listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you've heard will bring you back in the future. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found on psychealthandsafetyusa.com. Please become a part of the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting to us on LinkedIn. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much.
Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the FlourishDX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.